in this afternoon's session, I'd like to explain one method of doing this emptiness practice with respect to looking for me, the person. But before we do that, I thought it would be good to actually do the practice so that when we explain the steps in the practice we have some understanding of the steps because we've actually sort of done the practice. So let's start with a short meditation, 15-minute practice. Practice of looking for me, the person, me, the meditator. Where's this me that seems to be here meditating? Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. So remember, a vigilant posture is to simply keep the back nice and straight. And at the same time allow the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And relaxing more deeply with each out-breath. And with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. And simply becoming aware of the rhythm of the breath. Now, do you have a sense that there's a me here who's meditating? A me who is trying to relax the body, and a me who's trying to focus the mind on the breath. a me that seems to exist from its own side and doesn't seem to depend upon anything else to exist? Do you have this experience of being me, the meditator? Can the me who's meditating here be found anywhere? So first thoroughly search the body and look for the me who's meditating. Is the meditator to be found anywhere inside the head? Is the brain, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the brain simply something which me, the meditator, is using? Is the whole body itself, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the whole body itself simply something which me, the meditator, is trying to relax? Can the me who's meditating here be found anywhere in the mind? So search thoroughly every part of the mind and look for the me who's meditating. are any of the thoughts, emotions or concepts in the mind, are any of these the me who's meditating here? Or are thoughts, emotions and concepts merely things which me, the meditator, has? Is the whole mind itself, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the whole mind itself simply something which me, the meditator, is using to focus on the breath? Is the combination of the body and the mind, is that the me who's meditating here? Or is the combination of the body and the mind merely two things which me, the meditator, is trying to train? Two things which me, the meditator, possesses or has. Yet, other than the body and the mind, what else is there here? If there's nothing more than the body and the mind here, then where is the me who possesses this body and mind? Where is me, the meditator? If you can't find the me who's meditating here, simply rest in that experience of not finding. And then release all appearances and allow the mind to come to rest. And simply resting in awareness itself. Before we go on to talk about the various steps in that practice, that meditation just now, is there any questions from discussion group anyone would like to bring up?
You talked about how things are distinct but not different.
Distinct but not different? Yeah.
So I can understand how things can be distinct but not different.
So you can't understand how things can be distinct and not different. Well, of course, if we are stuck in the view of the dualistic view, then they're the same thing. So that's why we can't see there's a difference, because for us, in this dualistic view, either same, the two things are either the same or different. No third possibility.
What distinct means? Like
Distinct, well, different means this is big and this is small. Distinct means they're not one. They're distinct, but they're not different, because different for us means that's big and that's small. So distinct means they're not identical. And big and small are not identical, are they? They're distinct. Yeah?
not identical is not the same as different?
Identical means the same. Big and small are not the same. No? But for us, different means two completely unrelated, separate things. For us, different really means that's big and that's small. So they're not different because they don't exist independently. But we use the word distinct, meaning not the same. So these two things are not the same and they're not different. But of course, that's illogical if we have a dualistic view. But what we're saying is that there is no there is no duality. That's why they're neither the same nor different.
So my self regarding the other selves would
Are distinct. You're distinct. Your mind is distinct from others, but we can't use the word different. Because different means sort of independent. It implies that, based on our view.
And in the book it says the conventional self is the one that exists.
Correct. That's the only self that exists. And that's the one we're going to talk about this afternoon. Yeah.
According to Buddhism, do dreams or can dreams have a meaning, or is that again us just attaching a label to what we think we want to interpret the dreams as?
Can dreams have a meaning? I think there's a lot of theories about why we dream. And certainly we do find, particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, sometimes there's dream interpretation. So I think one thing is certain is that dreams are symbolic, and we shouldn't really accept dreams literally. Because, for example, I think the other day you did a purification practice with Felipe. And sometimes we can do like a whole retreat on that sort of purification practice, many days. And they often talk about that one of the signs that we're actually purifying, if we do a lot of this practice for a longer time, is that we dream imagining black stuff coming out of our body and vomiting and things. And of course, normally if we dream that, we think, oh, something bad. But actually, it symbolises purification. So in that sense, and I think the challenge is that we all have different dream symbolism, and the challenge is to work out our own dream language. And if we can do that, then to try to relate that to daily life and see, because sometimes there is a connection with daily life in that maybe there's something we need to address that is sort of surfacing in the dream. But again, I think you can't really do a literal connection. You have to try and work out your own dream symbolism.
Could you explain the difference between the two truths again?
Two truths.
Yeah.
Conventional truth is just simply everything that exists. Cups, laptops, person, mind, body, space. And an ultimate truth is how all of those things exist. And whatever exists is empty of independent existence. So person, body, mind, cup, laptop, everything is empty of independent existence. And that's ultimate truth. So ultimate truth is a quality of conventional truth. It's a characteristic of everything that exists. It's how everything exists. What is the ultimate nature of everything?
So what's the significance of dependent arising in relationship with conventional truth?
It is that now we grasp on to things that exist as existing independently, inherently. But in fact, what we see by investigating is that it doesn't. Everything is a dependent phenomenon, a dependent arising. So everything that we experience is a dependent arising. It depends on causes and conditions, parts and labeling.
So you're saying, is the significance of that being written next to conventional truth that it's the contrary position to conventional truth?
No, no. Well, actually, conventional truth, actually the Tibetan and probably the Sanskrit saying, it's actually, the word what's translated as conventional is sometimes, literally, it means truth for a concealer. And the concealer is ignorance. So what is true for our ignorance, meaning what exists as it appears, is everything we see. So it's true for our mind of ignorance, but actually conventional truth is said to be a falsity, meaning they do not exist in the way they appear to us. And it's only when we realise emptiness that we realise conventional truth to be dependent arisings. That comes after realising emptiness.
So if we kind of make up our own reality, so to say, like we can think this is this or this is this or whatever, and we kind of understand that. I don't really quite know how to word this,
but when you say make up reality, do you mean in terms of what exists or how things exist?
how things exist.
Ah, there's a big difference.
Yeah. But does that leave room in Buddhism for the belief in a higher power as well, in God or something?
Higher power. You mean like some independent entity?
Well, dependent on it as well, but like some kind of creator or something, like why does this exist? Sort of thing.
I mean, of course, the Buddhist assertion is that the creator is our own mind. That is the creator of the universe. So there's nothing outside.
But then it's not my mind, it's not your mind, but it's like all the minds.
No, but I mean, the only world that exists is the world of your experience, isn't it? See, the thing is, if we try to figure out this from the perspective of assuming there is some objective world there, then we won't figure it out. Buddhism saying is there is no independent objective world there, that we're somehow, all of us are looking at it a bit differently. That's not the view.
So it's just many different worlds.
Yeah, I mean, in a simple way, we can say there's 100 different experiences in this room, so we have 100 different worlds. I mean, there are a lot of similarity because we're all human and similar backgrounds and that, but I mean, everyone has their own individual, unique experience. No two people in this room have exactly the same experience. So in that sense, we can say there's 100 worlds.
Have you personally had an experience of emptiness?
Well, taste, but direct experience, no.
So a glimpse.
Yeah, I mean, getting a glimpse is not that difficult. In fact, often people have that without meditating at all. You know, sometimes through some hallucinogenic drugs. Of course, it could be a glimpse. It also could be just hallucination. So I'm not saying all drug-induced experiences are experiences of emptiness. In fact, probably most are not. But you can have a valid experience through that. Also, sometimes people just go out in nature and then they have this sort of oneness experience. So that's a little taste. I mean, it's not that difficult.
Well, that's why I'm asking is also have you had a psychedelic experience? And the reason why I ask is because I'm wondering what the relation is to the quote that you, the very last quote that you had from What Makes You Not a Buddhist, about the mescaline and
Sure.
the
Sure.
And because I have agreement and disagreement to that. But so I'm wondering, how does that tie into emptiness or this discussion?
Well, again, as I think he said in his quote, is that it's just a temporary transient experience, and it's not going to be a path to enlightenment. And in fact, often these sort of drugs, if you take them long term, can actually damage the body and damage the brain. And then you're relying on an external input. And then also, you know, what is that experience? I mean, it could be some valid thing. It could be just a complete hallucination. It's very difficult
So what do you mean by hallucination?
Well, it could just mean, you know, we have some visual hallucination. So, see, what I'm talking about here, what he's talking about is not what we see, because we can see all sorts of funny things on psychedelics. That's not of interest.
I see a lot of funny things not.
Sure. But what he was saying is that through that experience, we can come to maybe appreciate that things are not existing as they appear. It's not so much about what exists, but the fact that, because now everything seems so real, vivid and independent, and through that experience, we could come to appreciate, well, actually, maybe things are not existing in the same way.
It makes reality more like a dream.
Yeah, in fact, that's the analogy, like a dream. Yeah. So that can be helpful. Sure.
I mean, is it somewhat related to the dissolution of the ego? I mean, it's...
Well, again, it depends how you use the word ego. Again, generally I don't use the word ego because even in this room there's probably 20 different ideas what that word means. But if I use the word ego, for me, I use it in the context of grasping to inherently existent me. So in that sense, if we're using it that way, what we can say is a simplified version, is that psychology is trying to make an unhealthy ego healthy, and Buddhism is trying to transcend the ego, if we're using it in that way, that word. I mean, we can use it in many other ways, but in that sense, we're trying to transcend it, release it.
Right, but the mind has this addiction to be anchored in something.
Anchored in something, grasping? Yeah, of course. I mean, that's our fundamental ignorance.
So how does that then translate into everyday experience when you're trying to go to a point of ego diminishing?
Of?
Ego diminishing.
Yeah, less grasping, meaning we're more in harmony. We don't see so much, it seems like there's a boundary, there's a me here and a them there, completely independent. If we reduce the ego, if we're using the ego in that sense, it means that this false sense of duality starts to crumble. Does that mean we all become one blob? No, of course not. There's still me and you. But this sort of apparent separation, I'm not talking physical separation, but apparent separation in terms of existing independently of each other, that will crumble.
If we are not able to find the high, is it?
I didn't catch.
If we are not able to find the high,
Right.
is it because it is a concept, like we are looking at it?
Well, I'm going to explain it'll come now because I'm going to explain that meditation, so the answer will come in a minute.
So this is about yesterday's topic of death. When we think of suicide and why people do suicide, it is essentially the mind making the body take its own life. So is that like I find it difficult to explain, and like is it like the mind saying, okay, there's too much suffering in this life, let me try the next one?
Yeah, but usually people who suicide think that that's it. That the suffering's too much, let's finish it forever. I don't think too many people suicide who have a belief in the next life. I don't think so. I mean, possible if they're in a really bad state, but I mean, generally, I think people who understand the continuity wouldn't really enter their mind, I think. It's generally, if people have a belief that at the end of this life that's termination, and that if I kill myself, my suffering will end forever.
I'm sure you've heard the term law of attraction. Law of attraction.
Law of attraction?
Law of attraction.
Oh, law of attraction.
And then synchronicity, manifestation, that kind of thing. Is that explained by karma?
Law of attraction. In what sense, law of attraction?
Like synchronicities, like being in the right place at the right time.
Again, I think that's just this in being in harmony with reality. I think it's nothing more mystical than that. That's my feeling.
Well, being in harmony with reality. Okay, tell us how to do that.
By releasing the grasping.
Okay.
In harmony means to see ourselves as interdependent, that there's no independent me. That is what we're doing here. This emptiness is all about this, being in harmony.
Interesting.
Just related to that point, is the law of attraction and the law of Dharma similar?
Law of Dharma. What's the law of Dharma?
Universal law of Dharma.
I've never heard of that term. Sorry?
That's what Vipassana teaches. And it's
The
like
law of Dharma.
law of
What does that mean?
nature, The law of nature.
Oh, you mean the causality or interdependency?
Everything. It encompasses the law of nature as the law of Dharma.
Right. So you mean like causality then?
Yes, see a lot of similarities
Sure.
between that and the law of attraction.
Sure. I mean,
Am I on the right wavelength with that? Totally wrong.
but I mean, I think again the law of attraction. I mean, it's just this interdependency and causality. I don't think it's anything more than that.
Is cultivating non-attachment a taste of emptiness?
You mean if you directly cultivate non-attachment, is that a taste of emptiness?
Yeah, for example, so a question number 2 was a chocolate cake. If once a person who was a chocolate cake lover is now non-attached to chocolate cake, and maybe this person then starts eating plain bread, white bread, and has the same taste or it's the same joy eating the white bread, like having the same joy with eating chocolate cake. Is this a taste of emptiness?
Maybe not necessarily. We can, as we saw a little bit the other day, we talk about long-term strategy, short-term strategy. In short-term strategies, we deal with mental afflictions directly, and with attachment, it can be to understand the faults of attachment and understand that the happiness is not coming there, and so we can do all of these things. And actually, if we're very effective in that, we can dramatically reduce attachment to a very low level, but still, we would see ourselves as me here and the chocolate cake's there, independent. So the seed is still there of attachment. We haven't got rid of it. To get rid of it, we have to see that there is no independent me and independent chocolate cake. Yeah? But yes, we do both. So just because we've dramatically reduced attachment doesn't necessarily mean that we've had a realization of emptiness.
Because we still see the chocolate cake as a chocolate cake.
Yeah, as something independent of us. Yeah. But we understand through the faults of attachment, so on, not that having attachment is not going to help.
How do we know that we are experiencing emptiness?
As opposed to having some hallucination. Yeah. And that's why it's important to understand the process of the meditation, to understand the view of emptiness, and also it's important, if we're really doing this practice a lot, to have the guidance of an experienced teacher. Because it's so easy in this practice to go completely astray and to have some experience and think we're realizing emptiness when we're just completely somewhere else.
But we will feel something.
But the again, as I said before, the real test is if we're having some strong experience, is what happens after the meditation. Are we more calm? Are we less mental afflictions? Are we feeling more kind and compassionate? If so, that's a sign that it was a valid experience. If we have agitation, we have strong mental afflictions, we couldn't care less about others, then maybe that experience was just some sort of, I don't know, invalid, some sort of hallucination. I think it was down the back somewhere. No. Okay.
Can you explain the analogy between emptiness and dreams?
Yeah, so we use the dream as an analogy to help us understand emptiness, and in the text you have a lot of analogies, like an echo, a mirage, an illusion, the reflection of the moon in water. All of these analogies have one thing in common, is that they do not, it's easy to see that things that appear do not exist as they appear. You know, like a mirage and so forth. And so I find the dream very helpful, because in the dream analogy we have this, experientially we can have the lucid dream, and that can be that's a very similar thing to then, if we have an emptiness experience, what we see in daily life. Is that, of course, in the dream, if we don't know, if we're in the middle of the dream, then of course there seems to be a me here and a dream world there, independent, and therefore, of course, as per normal, if we see something pleasant, we have attachment, something unpleasant, aversion, and so forth. But if we become lucid in the dream, in the middle of the dream we realise, oh, this is a dream, then there still seems to be a dream me here, and there still seems to be a dream world out there, but now because we're lucid, we'll directly realise this appearance is deceptive, that there is no independent dream world there, that the dream world is a product of our mind, which means then if we're lucid and we see something pleasant, it would be very difficult to have attachment. And if we see something unpleasant, it would be very difficult to have aversion. And so similarly here, it's saying that this is like a dream, in that now there seems to be a me here and an independent world there, and of course we see something pleasant, attachment, unpleasant, aversion. But if we realise emptiness, then it'll be like becoming lucid, that it'll still seem like there's a me here and a world there, but because we've realised emptiness, we'll have directly realised that this appearance is deceiving us, which means it would become very difficult to have attachment to anything pleasant, aversion to anything unpleasant. So the dream is one of many analogies used to help understand the reality.
In Buddhism, you never mention, or you don't mention so much about faith.
Faith. Yeah.
And should be, first of all, we think about emptiness, and after, like, we create what we need to believe in something that we need to prove ourselves. What do you think about faith?
I mean, for anything we do in our life, we need faith. If we didn't have faith, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. But of course, we're talking about faith based on reasoning, not blind faith. Because the Buddha himself, remember, he said, don't do that. Don't just follow me out of devotion. You need to check it out like a goldsmith. Because blind faith is very shaky. It's not going to get us anywhere. So we need to check it out. So, this is the theory of emptiness. But fortunately, see, the thing is, in the modern world, of course, there are many brilliant philosophers who've come up with really, really brilliant philosophies, but most of them, there's no way of testing them empirically. You either look at them and see, yeah, that makes sense, I believe that, or I don't believe that. But we can't test it. There's no way to test it. But at least here, the Buddha said, well, here's my theory, this is what I discovered, and here's how you test it. But if you don't test it, it's just another theory. And it's only really through contemplation and trying to understand if it's logical, plus some experience, that we will have genuine faith. Faith based on reasoning and experience. And then based on that, then we go, okay, seems valid, I'm going to put effort into this. But otherwise, blind faith is not really going to get us anywhere.
Because things are empty, they must function. Because things function, they must be empty. Don't completely understand that.
Remember, because things are empty doesn't mean they don't really exist. When we hear things are empty, we have to immediately ask, empty of what? What are things empty of? They're not empty of existence. They're empty of being independent, existing from their own side. Because if this pen existed from its own side, if it had a unique nature of being a pen, then it couldn't change. And it actually couldn't function. But because it has no unique nature of being a pen from its own side, therefore it can change, therefore it can function.
So it's a slightly long question.
Cut it down. Abbreviate.
I did as much as possible. So, what's the behavioral common denominator between people who've realized emptiness or the concept of emptiness? Is it that they indulge less in sense perceptions, or they have heightened sense perception based on increased level of curiosity without the attachment?
Shamatha is the practice of cultivating a calm, clear, focused mind. And that is going to remember the threshold we talked about. So that, what you're going to find is that through doing shamatha practice, sometimes they say that your mind becomes so crystal clear you can almost count the atoms in the wall. Of course you can't, but it's a figure of speech. So similarly, it's just the shamatha practice which means that everything will be crystal clear. So that's got nothing to do with vipassana. And then in vipassana practice, is that what we'll find is that whatever the sense perception is, if we're really practicing vipassana emptiness and having some experience, you'll notice that your level of craving and attachment will really dramatically reduce. Eventually to zero attachment. Which means actually you're going to enjoy sense pleasures much more because now our craving and attachment is actually interfering with our enjoyment of pleasure.
Why is that? Why?
Because our mind is agitated. We know from our own experience, if you...
Let's say fear of losing it?
No. Let's say you have a favourite dessert, favourite food, and you're so much craving. What do we do often? We go... Are we really enjoying it when we do that? Not really. And then we eat too much and we feel sick. But if we drop the craving, every little mouthful will be like a sort of explosion of pleasure.
Curiosity. Yeah.
Well, it's not curiosity, it's just direct experience. It's not intellectual. We're going away. It's actually our intellectual mind that interferes with enjoyment. Because our intellectual mind, our craving and attachment comes with expectation. Bigger, better, different, and it's never enough. And so it's our intellectual mind that actually torpedoes our enjoyment of pleasure. So get rid of it, and you'll enjoy things much more.
Probably why a dog enjoys the same dog treat for years.
Sorry?
Probably why a dog enjoys the same dog treat for years.
Well, maybe even a dog has some craving and attachment, but probably less than us, I think.
You use the phrase dependent arising. From other books I read, interdependent arising.
It's just a term. So we saw that one of the dependencies is relational.
Yeah.
And so often in the modern world, we use the word interdependency for that. That's okay.
I see. Another question is the difference between emptiness and dependent arising. I'm not talking about the definition.
Right.
I kind of feel like when we talk about emptiness, we are thinking about mental cultivation. It's a mental status or mental apprehension.
Right.
And dependent arising is more, it's kind of an intellectual tool for users to understand the emptiness.
Not quite. Basically, as I briefly mentioned, I think this morning, emptiness and dependent arising are like two sides of a coin. And emptiness is looking at nature of reality from the perspective of negation, negating that things are independent. Whereas dependent arising is looking from the affirmative, that things exist through causes and conditions, parts and labelling. And what we find is that when it comes to experience, experientially, to realising, emptiness comes first. We meditate, we realise emptiness, and when we come out, we realise that things are dependent arisings. But they're two sides of the coin. So let's now go to this meditation we just did and look at the steps. So what we find often in the text from the great Indian masters of this Madhyamika system is that when in the text they were establishing the view of emptiness, then they would use a physical phenomena. In fact, Chandrakirti, the great Indian master from the 6th century, in his classic text on emptiness, when he was establishing the view of emptiness, he was using a cart, with wheels and so forth, that was drawn by a horse or a bullock or something. And he had a cart, and he said, okay, where's the cart there? And he'd pull a bit off and say, is that a cart? Is that a cart? Is that a cart? And he'd disassemble it and say, where's the cart? And through doing this process, we can come to understand the cart is nowhere to be found there in the parts. The cart is something that we're labelling on the basis and dependence upon the parts. So then we often find a physical phenomenon is used in the text because it's easier to relate to, more simple. But then in the text it says when it comes to meditating on emptiness, it's recommended we start with person. Because when we do this emptiness practice, we can investigate anything. We can investigate the cart, the body, the mind, the cart, whatever. But it recommends start with person. Reason being is that's something very familiar to us, and that's where the process starts to go wrong, where we grasp onto independent me, and then we thereby grasp onto independent world. So this is really sort of getting back to the square one. First start with me, the person. And there are, of course, a number of different ways we can investigate this me that seems to be here. The one we did in this meditation is one of the probably standard methods that are presented and probably one of the easier approaches. And this is presented with a presentation called the 4 Essential Points. And this is very nicely described in a book from His Holiness Dalai Lama called How to See Yourself as You Really Are. And that's the book I generally recommend to people who want to read a little bit about emptiness. How to See Yourself as You Really Are by the Dalai Lama. It's very clearly written, and it's also has little meditation exercises at the end of every chapter. So the 4 essential points, the first one, and I'll use the same terminology that he uses in his book. And the first step is what's called identifying the target. The technical term there that you'll find in meditation texts is identifying the object of negation. This is the most important point. If we get this right, the rest easily follows. If we get this wrong, then we've gone astray. So identifying the target means to get a clear picture of how we see ourselves existing. Because we're going to look for this me. And if we don't have a clear picture of how we see ourselves existing, when we look, it'll be inconclusive. For example, if you're going to look for a particular person in a crowded room, if you don't have a clear picture of what that person looks like, then you could look all day long and you won't be sure. Well, maybe that's it. I don't know. We won't get a result. And so this is what we did in the beginning of the meditation. I said at the beginning, do you have a sense there's a me here meditating? A me that seems to exist from its own side, doesn't seem to depend on anything else to exist. Do you have that experience? And then the point there is just to rest in that experience, to allow that to become more and more clear, this sense that there is an independent me here. Because that's what we're going to look for. If we don't have that clear picture, then when we look, it'll be inconclusive. And also at this first step, another point where often we go wrong in the beginning stages of this practice is that we turn it into an intellectual exercise. Because many of us, of course, have some intellectual idea of who we think we are, based on some sort of belief system. And then often, instead of looking for the me that instinctively seems to be there, we end up just confirming our belief system by the intellectual mind goes, I know the answer. You don't need to look, I know the answer. You know, for example, if we have some more Christian background and we're doing this meditation, then the intellectual mind might come in and say, well, I'm the soul. I'm just the soul. That's me. That's the real me. I don't need to look. Or if we've studied a bit of Buddhism and we've studied this idea that this subtle mental continuum is what goes from life to life, then the intellectual mind goes, I know the answer. I'm just a subtle mental continuum because that's what goes from life to life. Or if we've studied some more New Age philosophies, where often it's said that everything in the universe is subtle energy, subtle vibration, then the intellectual mind goes, I'm subtle energy, I'm subtle vibration, that's me. And then we're not doing the practice. But I can guarantee you that when you get angry, you're not identifying with soul, subtle mental continuum or subtle vibration as the me that's getting angry. Guarantee you. So we're not looking for an intellectual idea of who we think we are. That's irrelevant. What we're looking for is the me that we are grasping onto experientially, because that's what's driving our behaviour. And we need to look, am I existing like that or not? So if we have a clear picture of that, then we can look for that me that seems to be here. So this is the most important point, this first one. The second point is what's called limiting the possibilities. And that is that if there is an independent me here, it must be findable. We must be able to find it somewhere. So the second point is about knowing where we have to look. Because in our search, we want to look in all possible places. Because if we don't look in all possible places, we only look some places and we don't find, then we might go, well, I didn't find it there, but maybe it's somewhere else. And then again, it's not going to be conclusive. And if the independent me exists, it can only be in one of two places. It can only either be the same as the body and the mind, or different than the body and the mind. So they're the two places we need to look. Of course, the only logical place it might be is the same as the body and the mind. Because if the me is different than the body and the mind, it would mean we could have a sense of me over there somewhere. And we never have a sense of me that's not somehow connected with some aspect of the body and the mind. But to be complete, we need to do that search as well. And then we search in these two places. And we can do that in either order. The way we did it in this meditation and the one that's normally recommended is first search, is the me the same as the body and the mind? Can you find the me here within the body and the mind? And if you can't, then you must be able to take away the body and the mind and be left with the me. So in the meditation we did, I said, towards the end I said, other than the body and the mind, what else is there here? So what we can do is mentally take away the body and the mind and see if we're left with the me. So that's the fourth one, that's different. So again, if there's an independent me, that seems to be here, it must be findable. It can only be either the same as the body and the mind or different from the body and mind. Same as the body and mind would mean you look in the body, you look in the mind to see if you can find the me. So that's what we did in the meditation. First we looked in the body, we looked in the mind. If you can't find the me somewhere there, then the only place it could exist is different, which means you should be able to take away the body and the mind and be left with the me. And if we do this, and we don't find the me, then that is conclusive proof that the independent me does not exist. So then if we get to that point of not finding, we stop investigating and just hold that experience. That's an experience of emptiness. But again, it's not simply not finding. Because we've looked everywhere, it's actually realizing the me is not findable anywhere. That's an experience of emptiness. So if we get to that point of looking and we don't find, then just stop investigating and hold that experience of not finding. That is an experience of emptiness. And ideally, to simply hold that experience as long as we can. The longer we can hold that experience, the more it will penetrate our mind. The more it penetrates our mind, the more residual effect it will have after the meditation. So you may find that if you have this experience and you can really hold it well, you may find that experience is still affecting the mind for a few moments, a few minutes, maybe a few hours, maybe even a few days or so after the meditation. And while that experience is still affecting your mind after the meditation, again, what you'll notice is you'll tend to be more calm, less mental afflictions, and if they come up, they tend to be weaker and last shorter, and you find that you sort of instinctively feel closer to others, more kindness and compassion to others. But then this experience will wear off and we'll be back to normal. So what we want to do, of course, is to continue to do this practice and continue to deepen this experience. And so while I'm on that, then we can understand in this practice we're going through a number of stages. And here I like to use the Tibetan words because they're very short. Go, nyam, tok. Go in Tibetan means intellectual. Which means that the first stage, what we need to do is listen to some teachings on emptiness, reflect on emptiness, to get some idea, intellectual idea about emptiness, and an intellectual idea of how we can do the practice. But then, of course, if we leave emptiness as an intellectual idea, nothing's going to change in our life. We need to then apply that and meditate. And if we meditate, such as the one we did, we can come to a little taste of emptiness. That's nyam. Nyam means taste or experience. And that experience can be quite profound and strong and maybe lasts a bit, but it'll wear off and we'll be back to square one. So what we want to do, of course, is keep doing this meditation again and again and again and again. And familiarise ourselves with this practice more and more. But what we want to do, of course, is to have it so that that experience is lasting longer, and that is tok, or realisation. And that only comes if we have the basis of shamatha. If we have this very calm, clear, focused mind, then that experience can come to a direct insight into emptiness. If we don't have that shamatha, at best, we'll have this, which is very helpful, of course, but it's not stable and it'll wear off. So if we want to go from here to here, we need to put more effort into shamatha practice. And in fact, maybe many of you found trying to do this meditation was difficult. And one of the main reasons as a beginner it's difficult is because our mind is distracted, dull, and we can't investigate very clearly. So therefore, there's not much point in doing a lot of this vipassana practice if our mind is completely distracted and half asleep. We need to do more shamatha practice. The more shamatha practice, the easier this practice becomes. And also the more shamatha practice, what you'll find is that now maybe our intellectual mind keeps jumping in and going, I know the answer, I know the answer, I know the answer. The more shamatha you have, you'll find that that gets pacified more as well. And you'll be able to just look through direct experience. One more point, and then there was a question here, go. I haven't forgotten. When we do this practice, and we're doing it correctly as a beginner, then one of the most common experiences is fear arising in the practice. And if fear is arising in this practice, it's usually a very good sign. Because it means we are investigating correctly, and we're coming to see that this me is not to be found anywhere. But what's happening, of course, is that we are misinterpreting this to mean there's no me at all. Because the only me we've identified with our entire life is this independent me. So now there seems to be two possibilities. Either there is this independent me here, or there's no me at all. And so when we start to undermine this apparent independent me that seems to be here in this practice, then what happens is fear emerges. Because it seems like not finding means there's no me. So if fear is arising, then we can do a couple of things. First is, ask the question, who's having the fear? Because if you don't exist, there can be no fear. So the fact that fear is arising proves you exist. You're not going out of existence. And then, of course, the longer term solution, of course, is to reflect and study more on emptiness. To understand that emptiness doesn't mean nothing exists. It means things are dependently existent. So if we understand that, and then we get this experience of not finding, instead of fear arising, we'll have joy arising. Because we'll realise that this me that I've believed in my entire life that's caused me so much suffering simply does not exist. We'll be very happy about that. In fact, if we think about it, it's crazy. Something that never has existed, cannot exist, can never exist, is the root of all of our suffering. It's only because we believe it exists we suffer. I mean, it's crazy when you think about it. Okay, question.
Sorry, in my brain a little circuit. My question was, in terms of trying to find mind, if you have that internal dialogue, trying to find your mind, or maybe just going crazy from your own.
Well, hang on. We're not looking at the mind here.
Just in that meditation.
Yeah, but we weren't looking for the mind.
We were looking for me.
In the mind.
In the mind.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Sure.
But can you have me as the mind in the body, kind of all connected in a little shop?
But again, don't turn this meditation into an intellectual exercise. Then we're not doing the practice. We're not trying to intellectualize that. Then we're not being an empirical scientist.
But what's then looking for the me? Because is it not me looking for me?
It's you looking for the independent you that seems to be there, of course. You're looking for the independent me. Of course. I mean, who else?
But is it not independent me looking for...
No, because the independent me doesn't exist. How can a non-existent do anything? The me that is looking is the me that exists. Yeah? Something that doesn't exist can't do anything. So the me that's looking is the me that exists, which is a me that is depending on causes and conditions, parts, labeling. That's the dependent me. The me that exists is looking for the me, the independent me, which seems to exist. And if there's an independent me, we must be able to find it.
So to me, the dependent me
is looking.
The independent being is kind of part of the mind and body is there, dependent on that.
But remember again, whatever emptiness Vipassana practice we're doing, whatever we decide to be searching for, we need to just search for that, not somehow halfway look for something else. Then we've gone astray. So if we are looking for the body, we look for the body. If we're looking for the mind, we look for the mind. If we're looking for the person, we look for the person. If we're looking for the cup, we look for the cup. We don't start and go, well, hang on, who's doing this? Who's the observer? Where's the observer? Then we've gone sort of off somewhere else. No?
Is it possible that it really exists, but we are not able to find it?
But you see it there. It's not some subtle phenomenon that you can't see. I mean, it's right there. You experience it in every single moment.
Yeah, but you said before something like, if you cannot find it, then it's emptiness.
If you've
Right.
looked everywhere.
Right.
If you don't look everywhere, you just don't know.
So let's a short example to
Sure.
explain what I'm thinking.
Sure.
Let's say, for example, a horse. You sit in a horse and you ride it, okay?
Right.
So you have the mind or the brain of the horse and the horse, like the body, right? So you ride it, and if you ask to the horse who is riding you, he's going to feel it because he has something in the back, right? Yeah, are you following me? Because you look at me like,
I've lost
no
it.
idea. Lost it, right? All right. I go again. Oh, you have in the horse, he has two things: the brain and the body. Okay.
Right.
Right. Okay. So you ride the horse.
Right.
You're riding it. So
Right.
there's a third thing, which is you riding the horse.
Right, but sometimes there's no you and there's still a horse. So the you can't be the horse.
No. Okay. What I'm trying to say is, if you ask the horse who is driving you, he's going to answer something that is
Driving you.
Yeah, riding, like driving, like
Riding you, yeah.
guiding
Person.
you wherever you go.
Right.
Right. So he's going to tell you something that is not my mind and it's not my body. Okay.
Right, so there's a person on his back that's driving you.
Okay. So he can feel the person.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. We agree on that. But it's really easy. I mean, it's really simple.
Right, but then sometimes there's no person, but the horse is still being driven.
Yeah, and that's what.
So therefore, it can't be the person
Second.
It can't be the person because
It can be
sometimes
the
there's no
person
person
because
there.
it feels it, right? Because he's gonna say he's sitting on my back.
Right, but
This is not the hard part of the example. What I'm trying to say is, what happens if the horse has something in the brain that makes him move? So he's not going to be able to find it by himself, but something is driving him.
I'm completely lost now.
Okay, I thought in my mind it was easier.
Maybe what you're trying to point to is if we don't do shamatha practice and our mind is not very clear and focused, then of course everything's going to be hazy. We're not going to see anything. Of course. I mean, that would be like a scientist running an experiment with faulty equipment. They can run it 100 times and don't see anything, or they see lots of different things, inconclusive. Yeah. So if a scientist wants to find out an answer, they have to have equipment that runs perfect. Similarly, if we want to do this practice and to really be precise, we need equipment that's perfect, and that is shamatha. Without that, with a distracted, dull, unclear mind, we could just be looking all day and we go, well, I sense something, but I can't see anything. Is this the question?
No.
Oh, okay.
But don't worry, I mean, I will ask you later because
Let me go on to one more talk. There's one more important thing, and then we'll have some time for more questions. So here in this practice, and this is just one of many ways of investigation, so it's not the only one, but this is probably the easiest as a beginner to follow this procedure. So we can come to experience that there's no independent me here, but then also the question already here is, who's doing this? Who's the me? So of course there's a me that exists. So how does the person exist? And similarly with that question is, what is the Buddhist answer to what goes from life to life? So this is our life, beginning to end, and this body and mind. So if this is the present moment, the me that exists right now is a me that's merely labelled on the basis of the body that is present now and the mind that is present now. So remember, like the example of the pen, the me is not the body and the mind. Just like the pen is not the collection of the parts. The pen was merely labelled depending on the collection of the parts. So the me is not the collection of the body and the mind. The me is merely labelled depending on the body and the mind. That's the me that exists right now. The only me that exists. A me merely labelled on the basis of the body and the mind. And then at every point in the life, we have that. The me that exists is the me that is merely labelled on the mind and the body that is present now, in the moment, in that moment. When we come to the point of death, then what we saw in the death process, over the first 4 stages, this coarse body is shutting down and the coarse mind is shutting down. So the me, the person who's undergoing this process, is a me labelled on the coarse body and the coarse mind, which is shutting down. At the end of the 4th stage, coarse body has shut down. And then we have those 3 stages where the subtle body and subtle mind are shutting down. Who is the me that's undergoing that process? Is a me merely labelled on the subtle mind and subtle body. So the me at that point, of course, is no longer human, but it's a me, it's a person. Person just means with mind. And then at the last stage, the subtle body is shut down. Then we come to the last stage, which was the very subtle body and mind. So the me that's undergoing that process at that stage is a me merely labelled on the very subtle mind and very subtle body. Then that disconnects from this coarse body, and we enter into that bardo period. And the bardo now takes on a subtle body and a subtle mind. So the me that's undergoing the process is a me merely labelled on the subtle body and subtle mind at that time. And then at the end of that period, that mind of the bardo being, let's say it was going to be human, connects with the fertilised egg in the womb. So then we have the next life begins, and the me who's undergoing that is a me merely labelled on the mind and now the beginnings of the coarse body. So at all points here, the me that's undergoing this is a me labelled on the body and the mind that is present at the time. Of course, at different stages, they are very different. Even in this life, the body, after I think 7 years, is 100% different. 100%, yet it's still the same me, even though the basis has changed 100%. So the me is called, the term is the mere I. Mere I means the I, the me, the person that is merely labelled, the one that exists within conceptual framework. So the Buddhist answer, what goes from life to life, is mere I. But mere I doesn't mean that mere I is some sort of static entity which jumps from one life to the next. No such thing. In fact, there's no such thing that jumps through time even in the physical world. There's just change. So that is the me, the only me that exists now, and this is the me that is labelled at every point of this process. So that is the Buddhist answer to what goes from life to life.
Why do we have a body in the bardo state?
Because we need a body to support the mind at every stage.
It's like the old dad body.
No, it's a subtle body, so it's like energetic body, subtle energy. It's like body of light and so forth. It's not this sort of body.
Well, but this body of light we also have inside now. So
Yeah, exactly. But it's inside. But the me that we are now conscious of is this me. I mean, if you go into meditation and you drop down to that level, then the me who's in that state you could label on that basis. But for us now, we're not aware of the subtle energies in our body, and the me that we relate to is a me that's labelled on this.
Oh, I have several questions.
Why? Move on. Pick your most important one, because we're running out of time.
Okay, where is the karma stored? And also, like when we...
Okay.
So where's the wealth stored?
Right. Where is karma stored? Technically nowhere. Because karma is not a thing that is moving through time, is it? Because there's nothing moves through time. Karma is a theory that is describing process. Like everything, like causality, like everything in the physical world, it's all to describe the process. In fact, in this Madhyamika philosophical, we use, and when we described the karma, we talked about this idea of imprint. But does imprint mean that there's something stuck on the mind, and that thing that's stuck is moving? No, impossible. Nothing moves through time. So the sort of simple answer is that the imprints, which is not really a thing that is jumping, is connected to the mental continuum. But we have to understand that properly, otherwise we get some sort of strange ideas. Like that, what goes from life to life is this mere I, that's a thing, and this thing is jumping from one life to the next, which of course we see is there's nothing jumping. So similarly with karma.
And also for vow?
Yeah, same.
Let me try and rephrase the...
In fact, just the last point, this Madhyamika philosophical system, when they talk about karma, there's no mention of imprints. They don't talk about imprints at all, because they use a different way of explaining.
Let me try and rephrase the previous question, because I think many of us have this confusion. Let's say in the meditation we were asked to look for the liver instead of...
Look for the liver? Yeah, sure.
Instead of an independent me.
Well, you can't see the liver, so that would be difficult. Huh?
Because we can't see the liver.
Right, but the eye is something that's there in front of us all the time. It's not something we can't see. It's something that we are with that every single moment of our day. It's there. I mean, soon you have a sense of me?
I don't know.
You don't. You don't have a sense of me at all. You don't have a sense of me.
So I think
That's the one. That's what we've got to look for. That's it.
the confusion we are having is that even if, let's say, a doctor says, yes, you have a liver inside of you.
Yeah, but this is not the same. It's something, we're looking for something that is in our face, that is in front of us.
But how do we know, given we haven't seen it? Or
You see it all day long, every single moment. It's there. If it's not there, you wouldn't have a sense of me. We have a sense of me all day long, don't we? Well, maybe if we're asleep, we don't, or it's not so strong. But in everything we do, we have a sense. I'm doing this. I'm saying this. I'm doing that. That's it. That's the me. That one, not some abstract thing that we maybe can't see. We're looking for the experientially sensed me, the one that we are relating to in every single moment of our day. We're not looking for some abstract idea of person.
I think it's difficult to understand what we are looking for, and maybe like this.
Exactly. That's why we need to do the shamatha practice. Exactly.
10 days are probably very less for that.
Sorry?
These 10 days are probably very less.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is just a brief introduction. And as I mentioned this morning, this topic is something you're going to have to hear about many times, reflect on many times, meditate on many times. And if we, in the meditation, if we don't put any effort into shamatha practice, I would suggest we're not going to get very far at all, because we're doing this investigation with a mind that is distracted and half asleep. I mean, I don't think it's like a scientist running an experiment with completely faulty equipment. I mean, we're not going to get any results. So if we really put effort into the shamatha practice, I think what you'll find is that this first step, identifying the target, I think this will become more and more vivid and clear. I mean, it's there now. It's not something we need to look for, because it's there. But we need to try and find it. Where is this me that is there in my face all the time? It seems to be existing here somewhere. Is it really here? That's what we need to do. Otherwise, that's why I said the first step is the most important. Because otherwise people sort of try to think of some abstract idea of what me means, and they look for that. But that's not the me. I mean, that's not the me we're identifying with when we get angry. I mean, when we're angry, we have a very strong sense of me, don't we? That's the me we need to look for, the me that's getting angry. In fact, as a beginner, they often say that because our mind is not so clear and so forth, when we sit down to meditate, we relax the body, we relax the mind, then this strong sense of me often just goes a bit quiet. And because our mind is not very clear, we may not see it so clearly. So then they say, as a beginner, what you can do at the beginning of the meditation is think of a situation like where someone is criticizing you for something you didn't do. Usually when that happens, we have a very strong sense of me. Or another example sometimes you see, imagine you're standing on the edge of a cliff and someone comes up behind you and nudges you a little bit. Then we have a very strong sense of me. So then just rest in that experience of the me. Because that's the me we're identifying with, and that's appearing very clearly in our mind.
To be able to understand it.
No, we're not trying to understand it, we're just trying to find it.
To be able to understand what to find. Is it similar to...
It's not about understanding, it's just looking.
Is it similar to the ego, or that's not...
Again, we don't turn it into an intellectual exercise. If I say we're going to look for a particular person in a room and I show you a photo of them, do you then go ask questions? Well, where do they come from? What are they doing here? I mean, is that of any help? No, you just look at the photo and you go, okay, and then you look. I mean, you don't ask all these questions like, well, you know, which country are they from? How old are they? What do they like to eat? I mean, that's irrelevant here. All we do is we look. Oh yeah, okay, that's what I'm looking for. Yep, there they are. No, I looked everywhere, they're not over here. That's all. That's all we're doing. We're not trying to understand anything. We're just trying to get a clear picture of the me that really seems to be here, and then we look for that. That's it. Otherwise, we make it into some sort of intellectual exercise.
In regards to this chart.
This one, yeah.
Yes, with the death process.
Sure.
We go from coarse to subtle to very subtle and then back to subtle in the bardo. So is that why the very subtle, that point there is the point in which some masters have become enlightened? Because that's the bardo.
Because that is what is active at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Does the mere eye have any weight?
Weight.
Yeah, like...
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I mean, here, it's whatever the weight of the body is. That's how heavy I am. You know, the me that exists now is maybe 85 kilos. So, yeah, I weigh 85 kilos. Correct. No? I think I do. I think the last time I weighed myself I was about 85 kilos. Maybe I'll put on a bit of weight. Maybe I'm 87, okay.
No, but if you go to the next slide,
But even here, maybe in a year's time I'm 75 kilos or 100 kilos. Of course, in every moment it's changing. Of course. It's changing in every single moment. Wait, no.
You said that we have to be careful with the emptiness practice.
Careful?
Yeah, and you said that fear is a good sign. Fear is a good sign.
Normally, not always, but if we're doing the practice well, if we are investigating and then fear arises, it's usually because we've come to see that there's no me to be found.
Yeah, I get it. But
Good.
What would be a bad sign?
A bad sign of the practice.
Yes. You said you have to do this carefully.
Right.
If we want to be sure that we are doing it
Right.
the right way.
So what's a bad sign is we sit down and we start daydreaming, we sit down, we half asleep, we sit down and we're going round and round and round and our intellectual mind says, I know the answer. These are all bad signs.
I'm doing this practice but using another way, just I realize that I'm alive because I'm breathing, you know. So I'm related to this world. So if I can breathe, I stop existing. So I realize that I am connected to this world. So I am not living independently. You get it?
Sure, but then you're doing then what you're doing is the flip side. You're doing a dependent arising practice, which actually you're going to do with Felipe this afternoon. So actually to help us to avoid going to this extreme of nihilism and having fear, it's also good to do some practice on dependent arising. Exactly a little bit like this, to understand that, you know, the me here is dependent on certain factors, on this and that. And so that can be very helpful, and that's a little bit what you're going to do now with Felipe in the next session, actually. Because then that can help us to get a correct view of emptiness, that emptiness means, therefore, I'm dependent on many factors. So that's very good. Last question, then we have to stop.
While doing the shamatha practice using mind, we are supposed to observe the mind. So is it the sense of me that's observing the mind?
Yeah, I mean, again, of course we're using the mind to observe the mind, and then because the mind is what is the activity of observation, we can say I'm observing the mind by labelling me on the mind. Or, example, you know, if I walk out the door, I mean, what's walking out the door is the body, no? But I can say I'm walking out the door because I'm labelling I on the body that is walking out the door. No? Yeah, no, we've run over time. Quick, super quick.
What were the numbers again on that chart?
Oh, here this was a death process. So the first 4 stages, coarse body shutting down. The next 3 stages, subtle. Last, subtle. Very subtle. Okay, we've run over time there. So tomorrow, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at how all of these practices that we've covered in the last days, how they're all packaged within the Geluk school of Tibetan Buddhism in a system called Lam Rim, Stages of Path to Enlightenment, to help us to understand what practices should we do first and in what order should we do these practices. So that is, in your booklet, is from page 10 through to 14. 10 through to 14. So you see on 10 the 3 scopes or 3 levels of capacity. That's the Lam Rim. And then it goes through all of that from 10 to 14. And then tomorrow, also tomorrow afternoon, I'd like to go back to the shamatha practice because this is really the basis of Vipassana and the basis of all other practices. And I'd like to look at that in a little bit more detail tomorrow afternoon. And for that, we're going to use this diagram here on page 24 and the description on page 25. So that's the topic for tomorrow afternoon.
Sorry, 10 to 14 is other thing, I guess.
Sorry?
Pages 10 to 14
Yeah.
is other thing.
The Lam Rim. No, it's not. It's Lam Rim. See on page 10 it says Lam Rim in the box.
There in the box left.
Sorry.
And so what's following, of course, we've covered most of it, but here it's laying it out in that step-by-step way. So in the meditation with Felipe, now 5:30, you'll be doing a little impermanence in terms of the body, and then also this dependent arising, getting familiar with dependent arising. This evening, another shamatha practice of resting in awareness, and then the empathetic joy practice, a very nice practice focusing on the positives of ourselves and others. And then tomorrow morning, another shamatha practice of resting in awareness, and another Tong Len practice as well. So that's the meditations coming up. So let's take a break there and come back 5:30, and I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9.